I talk about it all the time with my Buddhist practice, no mud, no lotus. You have to be grateful for the tough times because it's the tough times that give birth to the good times, or at least the better times. Not to say that I'm going through bad times right now, but it's definitely some mud that I am appreciating in my life right now.
Really?
What's your mud to lotus ratio like these days?
It's probably a 70-30 right now.
70-30 Lotus? Lotus
Uh,
is winning or mud?
Mud's winning at this point, but
Well,
I
we
keep
need
that in
that.
mind. I keep that in mind that just means abundance of the lotus later.
Yeah, absolutely. Just so grateful for all of the things that will fruit from that mud and that have already fruited, including our newest partnership with Celestina. Celestina is classical music's wingman. By day, they're world class performers and studio musicians who've played your favorite films. By night, they're on a mission to broaden the definition of what classical music was, is, and can be. I'll talk a little bit more about Celestina here in a bit, but I'm thinking about that mud to lotus ratio these days
Yeah, what's yours?
because there's some just tasky things that are going on at this job of mine that I just need to press through this final week, and then I'm on winter break for a couple weeks, and
Nice.
can get that rest. I think really a lot of it is that you can only give what you got, and when you get toward the end of the year, especially a busy year like this one has been for me, you just crawling toward that finish line and
Yeah.
getting there. But more broadly, I think I've been thinking about what we've been talking about, specifically when it comes to the rise of this open anti-Semitism. There's been a lot that I've had to learn, a lot of healing that I have had to work on for myself, to have compassion, that the at least the compassion that I need to have for other communities, and put myself in other shoes and see different perspectives. I'm going to get more into that in the triloquy this week as it relates to a different community, but thinking about solidarity and unity and those things has gotten me thinking about areas in my musical education, even all the way from childhood, where there was some overlap. There were points in my elementary school music teaching where I learned Jewish melodies and
Hmm.
Jewish songs that I still remember to this day. Were,
Hmm.
were they teaching the Jewish songs to y'all back in the darker ages?
Jeez.
It was the 70s.
I think it was like fourth gradish, right around there,
Hmm.
that we learned Hava Nagila.
Okay. What
But
what
that's more for weddings, though.
but what was it about learning that? Was there a school wedding or something, or do you remember the context under which the music teacher brought it in?
No, I think this is one of those traveling music teachers. She would had the whole district,
Hmm.
so we got her on Thursdays or something like that, and
Okay.
everybody got their music education on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And she was Jewish, so perhaps she was just trying to share that with us.
Well, then maybe if it ever comes along one of your playlists, you have the opportunity to tell that story and
Hmm.
to share that bit of your own history. There's a recording of it I found by the London Festival Orchestra. It's not the how I'm typically used to hearing it, with stomping feet and a crowd
Right.
yelling and stuff, the wedding reception thing, but it's cool to hear in an orchestral context too. Here's a little bit of it. There's something about the modal nature of the music, the scale that they're using. It's not the typical Western classical scale. So it gives what I imagine a lot of people would say like a Middle Eastern sort of sound, maybe a
Hmm.
klezmer sound for
Yeah.
people who have a broader vocabulary. But the way that tambourine came in reminded me of something that someone brought to my attention. I want to shout out my homie Mike, who lives in New York City. I've been getting Caesar onto Florence Price, so now Mike has been listening to a lot of Florence Price, and he brought something to my attention that I don't think I had ever thought about before. So among Florence Price's concertos and symphonies are some tone poems, and there's one called the Mississippi River Suite.
Sure.
You've played that, aired that, I'm sure. Well, there's a section of it that speaks to one of those Hebrew stories, "Let My People Go," and that tambourine sort of comes in a similar way. And the idea, at least what Mike put in front of me, was that maybe Florence Price tipped her hat to Jewish communities back
Hmm.
in her day through this music. Let's take a listen here so you can hear what I'm talking about. So it kind of peeked its head through
It
for
did.
a minute there. What do you think? Have you ever thought about Jewish influence on the music of Florence Price, this black
Not
woman composer?
one time. Not one time.
But if you hear it through that context, you have to admit there is something there.
Well, I'm going to go there now.
Tell people exactly at marker,
Right. Because everybody's there with a stopwatch waiting.
How do you approach that as a radio host? Something really cool that happens 8 minutes or 13 minutes in the piece that you want the audience to hear and pay attention to, but you can't just ask them to have their timer going. How have you approached that specific issue in the past?
Usually just say, and be listening near the end when when the composer shouts out a local bird call, or
Sure.
it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough because you have tune in and tune out too. So.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying, all of these conversations, these dialogues, the content people have been creating around quelling anti-Semitism, it reminded me that in elementary school, maybe also around fifth grade, my music teacher, Miss Melody, if you can believe it, no, Miss Medley. It was Miss Medley. Shout out to Karen Medley.
Very good.
She introduced us to a tune called Bashana Haba'a. I gave a presentation earlier today as we're taping this, a mostly Jewish audience. And I just thought it was such an opportunity for me to build that bridge, to connect that gap. My knowing this song that I could still sing to this day.
Mhm.
And I've learned that it's more of not necessarily a Hanukkah tune, but a New Year's tune. The English translation of the lyrics are: "Next year we will sit on the porch and count migrating birds. Children on vacation will play catch between the house and the fields. You will yet see how good it will be next year." So we're talking about all of this mud that, the lotuses haven't necessarily, peeked their way through that water yet and done that, but it's coming. So I'm just really grateful to have learned that song long ago and to still be able to remember it. Here's a an excerpt of a performance of it by a few San Francisco symphony musicians. Let's see what they did with it here. Melissa Kleinbart and Eugene Izotov featured there. When we talk about holiday programming, I think there, have been those discussions from, I don't know, the past 20 years now, Merry Christmas versus Happy Holidays and all those
Hmm.
sorts of things. We can split hairs and have that conversation, but at the end of the day, if the holiday concert is still, in essence, a Christmas concert, you just need to call it that. So that means that we have to make holiday programming that programming that speaks to more than the Christmas tradition or even the Western perspective on things. We have to bridge those gaps and find that programming. So what that means is that maybe some of us, all of us, need to expand our thought processes on holiday programming on the repertoire, and be able to make suggestions where we can. We'll be talking about Kwanzaa when we get there
Hmm.
later this month, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about, okay, what are the pieces of music that I can align with that celebration? And I think on the same token, we need to be thinking about that for holiday programming, for pieces that speak to Hanukkah specifically. And Jewish people have told me everywhere that Hanukkah isn't even the biggest deal
Right.
holiday, but still, we have the holiday season and we have people who know nothing. I think there's something to broadening that perspective. I would go as far as to say it should be considered a responsibility for folks who present.
Do you think Christmas is under attack?
Do I think Christmas is under attack? No, I think Christmas is attacking me. I think it's the
Oh,
converse.
jeez.
But what did we talk about last week or the week before? The holiday season is here. You might as well just let it happen to you.
Just go limp.
Well, anyway, I think the bigger point is that, when you write a break, when you have a Jewish traditional tune, folk song, Hanukkah melody or something on your playlist, that's an opportunity for you to not only diversify people's ideas around holiday programming, but sort of put humanity next to the tradition or make it relevant for today. I don't know. I think of there being a responsibility when it comes to the music, the nostalgia that people have around certain things, making people feel seen, and genuinely teaching people about something. I've learned so much, in these past few months as I have refocused my attention on understanding what Jewish equity looks like. And when it comes to programming, I think we can do just that. I won't say his name because he may not want me to do that. But a good friend of mine, who's black, he told me when he was growing up as a kid, he saw a Star of David in a couple of houses and asked his mom why didn't they have one. That's what people are doing. Let's do that too. So his mom was like, okay, so you have this black family who's not Jewish anything with a Star of David in their window because the son wanted it and he thought
Hmm.
it was pretty. That's a story that could be told. Just I don't know, taking the opportunity to say something that is teaching, that not only sheds light but sheds humanity and sheds something real in this part of the season. Are you in your complaining mode about your holiday programming, or are you still hanging on in the spirit of it?
Keep in mind that by the time the complaining happens,
It's the 24th.
I am ready to put King Wenceslas and all of his frankincense on these 3 ships and leave this winter wonderland. Let me tell you.
I hear you.
Because when you do this kind of work, you've got proximity to it every day,
Right.
and
Right.
not just a little sliver of it.
So that means broadening the programming, the holiday programming would even benefit the host because you're not
You're not
listening
going to
to
be
the
bored.
same thing here,
Mhm.
here and all the time. All right. Well, anyway, happy holidays, everyone.
DAZE.
I believe that Hanukkah begins on the 18th this year. So before we, record again, Hanukkah will have started. So happy Hanukkah to everyone out there who celebrates. Let's build unity through holiday programming. Let's build unity through dialogue, and let's build unity through reframing the way we think about this thing called classical music. Let's jump in. I'm Garrett McQueen.
I'm Scott Blankenship.
And this is Triloquy, Opus 178 on this cold, wintry evening here in Minnesota. Thank you so much for tuning in to returning listeners. We could not do this without you. The Triloquy podcast exists for you and exists because of you. So thank you so much for your continued listenership and continued support. For new listeners, if this is your first time checking out the Triloquy podcast, Triloquy is a show that takes the concept of classical music and expands it. We take pieces of music that would be traditionally approximated to that phrase, pieces of music that aren't, as well as conversations, talking points, dialogues, all toward the effort of decolonizing that phrase, classical music, making the idea and concept of classical music something that actually relates to all of our varied, diverse experiences and lived perspectives on music. For more information on the Triloquy podcast, to check out past opuses and to donate, visit our website, TRILLOQUY.org. In addition to your very generous support for the Triloquy podcast comes from Celestina. We are so happy to have developed a partnership with them, and I think they're such an incredible organization, Scott. Just to read a little bit about what we do from their website, it says Celestina currently offers 3 areas of programming. All 3 serve our mission of connecting others to our art form in areas where we as musicians see a distinct need. This includes Sounds Promising, their tuition-free young artist program, Vital Sounds, which is a private virtual bedside concert 3 days a week for patients in UCLA's ICU, and in-person and virtual performances. It's that Vital Sounds that I'm really attracted to. I've had the great fortune of not needing to spend an extended time in the hospital any time in my life. I've never broken a bone. None of that has happened.
You're lucky.
But I can imagine that any ray of light you need, especially if you're spending a long time in the hospital, especially if you're in the ICU, how that can be just really incredible, just so encouraging to those people.
Oh, yeah.
Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, Celestina musicians, young artists, and guest artists perform private virtual concerts for patients, their families, and medical staff at UCLA's ICU. In March of 2021, they were honored to share Yo-Yo Ma's artistry with patients and staff for a special performance. So not only is it their own musicians, they reach way outside of the organization, all to bring music to the people. So we are so incredibly honored and excited to be partnered with Celestina here on Triloquy. In the third movement today, I have the great pleasure of featuring Maria Clark and Maria Thompson Corley, the artist behind a new recording called Soul Sanctuary. More on that in a bit. We're going to have a K-pop finale today,
Nice.
just in time for the holiday season, and all sorts of stuff in between. But for now, let's jump into movement 1. All right. Once again, Scott, I'm going to get us started this week in our first movement, checking our accidentals, and I'm going to give us a sharp. I'm reading here from the SeattleTimes.com, the headline, "This composer combines South Indian classical music and Western choral tradition." We have 2 cardinal directions there, Western and South. What can you tell me about the significance of South Indian versus just Indian? Have you happened to meet a South Indian musical artist
I
before?
I would point people back to Triloquy Opus 25.
Oh, you remember the number. Yeah.
I do, yeah. And that was an epic in-studio performance and interview
Mm-hmm.
with
Bupati.
playing the Mandingam.
Mm-hmm. And then
And
our friend here in Minnesota,
Nirmala,
Yeah.
Nirmala Rajasekhar playing the Saraswati Veena.
Yeah.
And I loved everything about that day, in particular, just the way that Nirmala's presence in the room was just a calming, and she was such a genuinely happy person
Yeah.
that was infectious. And I loved the respect that she paid to the music tradition, how she would prepare by herself and meditate a little bit before she would perform.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional dress. I love all the pageantry around it.
And it's not only Nirmala who is just spreading this joy. Her daughter, Shruti, is doing the same thing. And that's actually who this article is about. I'll read a little bit here. Quote, "Music itself can be a conduit for the community, said Shruti Rajasekar on the connection between humans through hearing and vibration. Rajasekar is the composer behind several works and the coming Seattle Pro Musica program, Behold the Star. Behold the Star will premiere December 10th, so it already happened as we're recording this, at Bastyr University Chapel, and will be performed on December 17th. Coming up at Seattle First Baptist Church. The program will include selected works by Rajasekar as well as familiar holiday songs for choral ensembles. So
Hmm.
one of my favorite things about Shruti's music, I've heard it performed live, of course, recordings, is that it really does beautifully make the point of classical music being more than what we here in the West typically think of. A lot of her music definitely fits inside of what would people would consider that classical music box, but it definitely speaks to the South Indian musical traditions,
Mhm.
the expanded scales that are used, and the unique, beautiful technique. I think it's just the perfect way to make that point of classical music being more than Western Europe, using Indian and specifically South Indian music as the example. And Shruti Rajasekar just masterfully makes that point musically through her compositions. One of my questions, though, one of the things I wanted to throw at you is that this music, this beautiful Carnatic music, is going on a concert, one of these holiday programs, as we were just talking about, where
Mhm.
a lot of people are going to these performances that wouldn't typically. I know in my days playing in orchestras, the 4th of July pops would be full. We play outside in the park as thousands of people, and the Christmas pops, the holiday
You
pops.
play that
We
outside
we
too?
we don't play it outside. Some orchestras do. Where it's warm enough to do that. But because the crowds are always so big, we
Right.
we will play something like 7 shows of it, and most of the 7 shows would be sold out.
And you would be complaining about it by the end of those 7 shows.
Oh, of course, because it's the same music this many times. But
Yep.
I guess what I'm getting to is that you have a larger audience than you have other times of the year, probably your largest audience of the year. Do you think it's even more of a risk to expand programming in front of audiences that you're likely only going to see once a year? Or is it a unique opportunity to expand their idea on what orchestras are doing by integrating, for lack of a better word, integrating holiday programming in this way?
Yeah, such an interesting wrestling match that question is. You're 100% right that you've got a larger audience during the holidays, especially Christmas. That's when people go,
Mhm.
right? And yeah, that would be the perfect opportunity to try to widen the circle a little bit.
So you don't see it as a risk.
Um, as a listener,
As a presenter, programmer, if you're putting together the programming, if you have any say, are you gonna
right.
accept the narrative that this is risky, or are you gonna go for it?
Right. Well, that's the thing is that thinking about that audience, because what if you're an ensemble that has a reputation for a thing
Mhm.
and people go to hear you do that thing every year because that's their holiday tradition? I'm thinking Mannheim Steamroller.
Sure.
They churn out the same program every year, and people go to the rafters
Mhm.
to hear it. But in this instance, with this group Pro Musica, is it Seattle Pro Musica?
Mhm.
The Seattle Pro Musica program, one of the things that they talk about here is we have been much more conscious about trying to expand beyond doing music by white composers. And a lot of this is to open up the space for the choir to hear the new perspectives and to work with somebody who can bring their personal story as well as their cultural background. So for them, that's what people would expect from them, is the different,
Sure.
right? So I really think it's the audience and what you're known for. That it's a wrestling match.
And I hear that, there's a leader of an orchestra. We've had conversations, and basically or I won't name them, but this organization is very known and celebrated for their holiday programming, what they do every Christmas season. One year they tried to switch it up a little bit, do something a little different. And I understand there was hate mail everywhere. First of all, I was like, welcome to my world.
Yep.
But secondly, I guess that is just something I I haven't always considered. I figured the holiday concert goers would appreciate something new, something different, because at the end of the day, they're doing something new and different, at least something that they don't typically do. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm always with shaking up the programming, shaking the table in that way. I just thought I would, get your thoughts on how risky, or not it is to, take your non-typical audience and, put a little put a little hot sauce in the stew or whatever.
One Christmas morning, in a former life when I was doing the morning show, I played probably about 7:15 in the morning. I played
Christmas morning?
On Christmas Eve
Okay.
morning. I played a piece that was not from the catalog that you would expect on a Christmas morning, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was a very early music or Renaissance type sounding band, and it was a song about the Virgin Mary, but it wasn't anything that you would recognize for the holiday, right?
Okay, so we're trying to like get programming updated, and you go even older, back into the Renaissance. You go take us even back, further back.
This was just a little bit of a different flavor.
Okay,
and I didn't see any difference sonically. I didn't see any difference between that and say like the
in Chelsea's Deum and all that.
the penny whistle and drone and sackbut,
I see
recordings.
Also, this is like Celtic.
And sure, Sephardic, some of it, yeah. And people would call up, "What are you doing? What is this?" And I'd say, "Well, it's a song about the Virgin Mary. It's going to be over here in like 2 minutes. It's too late. I've ruined Christmas."
What would you like to share with the audience?
Just a little bit of that sound.
What this sounded like.
Yeah, this is not the exact track, but it is the flavor of it.
I was actually a little nervous when you started talking about Renaissance music, but there's a percussion groove in there that I can get with. I don't know if I would be offended by that on Christmas Eve morning. The
track that ruined Christmas 2004.
So again, let's take that aesthetic. For the folks who are coming to the concert hall this one time of the year, that is something that what we just listened to was something that you would say, hey, maybe this won't scare them away permanently. Maybe this would even get them to stay. What would be your goal? What outcome would you hope for or did you hope for, I guess, in this case, by putting in a little something different where people would usually expect something they would expect?
Frankly, I was bored. I was ready for something different. And I thought, if I'm ready, then there has to be somebody else out there that's ready too. Now, granted, nobody called in with any kudos or sent me any emails with kudos.
Yeah.
No, it was mostly people who were pissed off. But
now make the case for me. Help me understand. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second. Why does it matter if the host is bored? This is programming for the audience, for the listeners. Who cares if the host is bored?
What would you say if somebody asked you that?
I would say that the host, now I feel like I'm answering for you, but my response would be the host's feeling about the music can impact the experience that the listener has. So if a host is very excited about something, the listener has an even better chance of having a good experience with the programming. If the host is bored, maybe it's the host's responsibility to tuck that away and really sell this music. But if there's a genuine organic excitement or interest there on the part of the host, there's a better potential of that happening for the listener. That is how I would answer that.
That is one of the reasons.
Okay, what are others, if you can, offer any?
Widen the circle. Let's get your palate ready for something other than what you'd expect. We don't have to listen to all of these same carols on a loop,
Mhm.
gradually increasing until we get to Christmas Eve. We don't have to.
Yeah, yeah. I think
And
that's also my point. Like,
and right,
nothing bad is gonna happen, you know?
not the least of all of it is you get a little bit of excitement in the presenter's voice,
Mhm.
and maybe that's contagious. Sure, there's that, but you're going to notice the board sound in my voice a lot more prevalent than the excitement for a piece of music. I can tell you that.
So to go back to this article, to go back to Shruti's music, I think again that point of being able to work with a living composer, who can share their personal story. I think what you read, share their story and their culture. Well,
Yeah.
I'm paying attention to that story part. We can't. Get the story of the person who wrote Jingle Bells, or we can't get the story of Handel for his Messiah. Thank goodness we can't get his story. Y'all would ignore it anyway. But I
Yo.
think that personal connection plays a huge role. I'll read a little bit more from it here. It says, "Behold, the Star will present 'I Am My Own,' Rajasekhar's commissioned piece that ponders the intersections of communal and individual effort." In the composition, Rajasekhar explores the legend of the Star of Bethlehem and aligns the holy entity with Krishna's nakshatra, a birth star, in Hindu teaching. So we have, the holiday theme of the star, which is very ubiquitous, for most people already. But we're not only meshing Western and Eastern musical aesthetics, but Western and Eastern stories, mythologies that are connected to this time of year.
Hmm.
It's one thing to get, the Western, let's just say white audience interested in a musical aesthetic from far away. Do you think it offers even more of a challenge to take something as personal as, the story of baby Jesus as Christians contextualize this time of year and mesh that with somebody who has nothing to do with the Christian religion? I definitely know, I'm not naive. I know that there are definitely more conservative people who would, really call foul and be offended.
You
And this
bet.
is a war on Christmas. So those
Yep.
people exist.
Hmm.
But generally speaking, is it your thought, your understanding that classical audiences, even once a year, holiday time classical audiences, would this be going too far? Would this be fine? What would you generally expect if you had to guess, what general reaction to this sort of culture blending could be?
I I'm not sure because just over this past weekend, the Minnesota Orchestra did a blend with Messiah. They played Messiah with a blended it with a piece called Nuestra Navidad. So there was an English and Spanish confluence there. So I don't. I probably asked them to see how it worked out for them.
Sure.
But again, if you have a group that this is their bag, this is what they do, then the audience that's going to come is interested in that.
So it's all rooted. You're coming back around to that, and I hear your point. I guess what I'm saying is that we can't expect the ensembles that quote just do this to be the only ones doing that. I think this is the responsibility of all of the ensembles, all of the organizations this year that are pulling in larger than other times of the year audiences. I definitely hear you when, an audience expects this out of this ensemble. So yes, I think there's value in the big town orchestras, the pops ensembles, the whoever that does all of the Vince Guaraldi and what's the bump 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 the sleigh ride. I can't believe I forgot the name of that one. All
Yeah.
all of those classic tunes
Hmm.
that is classic. I think there's an opportunity there for them as well. So I guess I'm exploring what this could look like for those very typical audiences.
Mm.
We can talk about, what it looks like organizationally. I like to think about what the person in their Christmas finest, their faux fur and all of that, what might be their reaction to sitting down in a concert hall and learning about Krishna, as it relates to the holiday season as opposed to baby Jesus.
Yeah, it's a good point. But I really feel like if the bigger organizations wanted to do that, they would have been doing it.
See, and that's the thing right there. So you're saying they just don't want to, or maybe they just don't know to, or no one has ever made the idea. I would have never thought about
Sure.
Krishna's star,
or perhaps there's no budget to get the background that you need to be able to do a program and be competent.
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, hire in the right people and make sure you're
right.
So I get that point as well. Well, either way, I'm sure this is going to be a really incredible performance. Of course, I wish I could be there, but I'll be keeping an ear out for the recording. Just to close this out, at the end of this Seattle Times article, it says, quote, "My mother made the decision to be a full-time musician in this country," Rajasekhar said of her inspiration to stake a modern space in classical canons. Again, shout out to Nirmala there. Rajasekhar will continue to sail forward into a cartography of her own delineation. Quote, "The big thing is I never have a plan ever. If I picture 2 years from now, it's totally blank for me," she said, smiling. That can sound very artsy or whatever. Oh, what privilege a composer has to just live so free. But as we all learned, March 2020, you know, 2 years from now, that really is a white slate, whether we want to admit it or not.
All of our futures are blank.
Right. At least for now. But
that just sounds like somebody who's like
at peace,
right on the door of nirvana.
Yeah, exactly. So huge shout out and congratulations to Shruti Rajasekhar. If you are unfamiliar with her music, I'll have a link to this article where you can learn more about her in the description. I wanted to transition to our next accidental with a performance featuring Shruti Rajasekhar. So this is a performance that was sponsored by the Schubert Club. Shout out to everyone at the Schubert Club. It's a piece of music called Devotee. It features Carrie Shaw, Laura Healy, Nicholas Chalmers, Tim Takach, and Shruti Rajasekhar, the Carnatic vocalist you'll hear featured here. So huge congratulations again. Here's a little bit of Devotee by Shruti Rajasekhar to get us to our next accidental.
मद्भक्तो मद्भक्तो मद्याजी मां नमस्कुरु नमस्कुरु मामेवैषसि योक्त्वैवं मामेवैषसि योक्त्वैवं
I hate to cut it off. It's just so beautiful and so mesmerizing. So again, you were in the position of a presenter, a power position, decision-making position. You can give the audience the Enoch Chelsea's Deo that you know that they are expecting and that they'll come back for, or you can offer the audience what we just heard. Which direction do you go? And what's your justification if you have to justify?
If I'm going to play that, if I'm going to air that?
Not air or put live on a stage, just in general. Would you go to bat for it? And how would you go to bat for it as opposed to what the holiday classical audiences are used to hearing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm not sure exactly how to answer because this is the first time that I've even
I mean, because
been
it is
aware
beautiful music.
that
That's an argument in itself.
Sure, sure. So I could definitely make the argument that we need to include that to move forward and appeal to more listeners,
Hmm.
a broader listenership. What if you give up 30% of your hour to something new and experimental like that? I mean, I think that I'm not even going to say that that's daring. I'm going to say that that's just a positive ratio to try to keep some of your base and attract some new as well.
I think the point that I make, and maybe that I'm trying to make here even, is that stakeholders, decision makers, we get hung up more on the tradition than a lot of the audience may. I don't see anybody finding that music objectionable, even in the context of holiday programming. I feel that that's something that people would love and write positive emails about. But again, maybe my perspective on the general audiences are different, but I see that as a win. I don't see that as a risk at all.
Sure, I'm sure that there are some listeners that
Yeah.
would love it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
of
I
course,
give
there's
them
always going to
credit.
be somebody to hate something. I'm not saying that those people don't exist.
There's somebody that's just
Right.
waiting for you to say something wrong.
I'm
Yes.
just saying that what we talk about as risky programming, from my perspective, is, and I've said this before, is a surefire win. Not something that's a risk at all. Something that will definitely be heard and be appreciated. So that's just what I try to bring to the space and bring to the table. Just that affirmative, I
Sure.
don't know, instead of a, well, I don't know. Just
Yep,
just
promote it.
having the positive attitude.
Exactly.
Anyway, shout out and congratulations to Shruti. All right, we got one more accidental. Tell us what happened, and I think it needs a little bit of this. Go for it.
I'm reading from violinist.com. Laura Niles writes, Detroit Symphony condemns racial slurs shouted by audience member during a jazz concert.
Okay, so we're in our holiday concert
Right.
going mode. Again, people don't come to the concert hall anytime, but this time of year, they come this one time, and what do they hear coming from the audience? What is a part of their experience but the N-word? Or maybe we don't know that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
say
said we're
more.
not. They said, well, we're not going to say what the slur was, but there was a slur. Mistakes were made, and so they posted all sorts of apologies and saying that that there's no room for that sort of bigotry and racism at with the Detroit Symphony.
What sort of
there-
concert was this?
This is the hilarious part to me. Cyrus Chestnut, jazz band leader and pianist, is performing the music of Vince Guaraldi. So this is a Charlie Brown Christmas show.
Classic Christmas.
Right. And somebody goes and yells a racial slur. They come back with the announcement on their Facebook page. The DSO is deeply disappointed by an incident that took place towards the end of Friday night's concerts. Now, I think this is interesting. It's near the end.
Mhm.
Why near the end? Why there? When the audience members shouted a racial slur. Racism and bigotry have no place in Orchestra Hall, and behavior like this is unacceptable, and we're currently investigating and will enact a permanent ban once we identify the ticket holder.
Several things to unpack here. First of all, you wanted to point out that the racial slur was yelled from the audience at the end.
Near the end.
To me, that's I guess I am curious about why or how you see that as significant, because I see a person who was just so fed up. He was trying to hold it in. Oh, I'm trying to be a nice guy, but at the end of the day, I just don't want to see this no on stage. So it finally jumped out at the end. That's what I imagine.
At the end of the day, I see this is not the first time that Cyrus has played this show. It's a few years long tradition.
Oh, sure.
Okay, so anybody who bought a ticket to this knows where they're going. And I think that the person knew exactly what they were doing, and I'm just curious as to why. And I don't think they were holding it in.
I'm going to
at
push
all.
back because
I don't
listen,
think they were holding it in. I think that there was something strategic.
I played shout out to the Phantom and the Phoenix, DJ Philly, and all the members of the Philharmonic Orchestra. We played the New Year's Eve show at the Kennedy Center, and it was clear, Scott, that a number of people saw the word orchestra and bought a ticket.
And
So I am sure that there could be someone who bought a ticket and didn't know it was going to be somebody black on stage. So I don't even think that it could be that. I think the status or the tradition
Sure.
of going to the concert hall even, foregrounds what people know that they're buying tickets for.
I see your point of view, but I'm thinking that anybody who pays attention to the website when they're ordering tickets would see that.
Well, I mean, someone
now,
who's using the N-word probably doesn't have the internet.
we don't
Go
know.
on.
We don't know that it was the N-word, but you can certainly figure out that might have been it.
Well, what do you think? So, what do you think of the DSO's response as it relates to was it the N-word or what was it? They are just not saying what it is. Is that what's most appropriate? I mean, is it wrong to even for a white person to even type the word? I mean, what do you
Right.
what do you think?
Well, actually, in the comments section, somebody brings up that very thing. I'm not sure that this was the wise reaction by issuing this statement and threatening an investigation. They're letting everybody who was not in the hall know what happened. Yes. This kind of publicity may be exactly what the perpetrator's craving. People will come up with defenses of free speech and other anti-woke BS. Is that what you're getting at?
I think that commenter is saying at the end of the day, this is posturing, this is virtue signaling, and it's all going to happen behind the scenes anyway. So it's not like y'all are going to tell us. So why even publish this official reaction to the incident? That's what I hear in that comment.
Well, maybe it sends the message that it won't be tolerated, and if you do it, you're not going to be able to come back and see another show. Casinos share information with each other about cheaters and thieves and stuff like that, and that go from casino to casino.
And that was my question to you before we turned on the mic. So if we're talking about an equity-focused investigation, should they publish, if they find out who this person is, should they publish the name? If they don't publish the name, should this be shared among arts institutions just like the casinos do? Don't let such and such buy a ticket because he's going to yell such and such during the thing or whatever.
So about that? You're going to get him canceled.
Well, I didn't say cancel the man, but you said the casinos don't let cheaters in chain wide. What if arts institutions had that same level of unity?
You don't call it
umoja there, you know?
you don't call that being canceled? If you can't go and see
I mean, being canceled is fake. He can still go to Home Depot. He can still go,
arts
to
canceled.
Denim and Diamonds, wherever those people go
he's
who
arts
use
canceled.
that language. So sure, symphonically canceled. What do you think about that? Do you think that would be going too far? Do you think that would be appropriate?
Sure, it's appropriate. Yeah, I'm going to say it's appropriate in my mind.
Okay. Do you think that's something
shame?
I don't know, because I think there's something to that.
You
comment
think they'll be pleased? You think that they would be proud of what the slur?
Well, because it's not. I don't know. I think there's a thin line between seeking retribution and trying to punish someone and doing the equitable thing. But yeah, I kind of agree with the comment. What is this official statement? You won't tell us the word that was said. Obviously, you're not going to tell us who the person is. We likely won't know the results of this investigation. So what is this?
So I'll get right to it. The thing that they're doing here is straddling both sides. So I would just say in the future, just pick a side and be on it. Either you're going to say what the slur was and the person's name, and here's this picture, or whoever's picture it is, or don't say anything at all.
I mean, and we also have to face the fact that the tradition of orchestral music, the tradition of orchestras, the audiences they center, who they market to, who the programming is built around people who would use that language. He was there. I didn't know that this concert was going on this weekend. I don't live in Detroit, so I'm outside of the spectrum of who they market to. But Scott, you have to admit that the cultivation and the maintenance of this one predominantly white audience, just generally in orchestral programming, has been a safe haven for people who like being squarely around white folks and listening to white music and looking at their all white orchestras. So, why wouldn't someone who would say something like this crop up out of that crowd?
Now that you say that, that's interesting. And I wonder what it would be, what it was like for that person in the proximity, in that person's section,
Mm-hmm.
if there was any backlash in the moment.
That's what I'm saying. Y'all just gonna sit there quiet?
Right. Right.
Y'all not gonna do nothing, say nothing?
Right. So I wonder what happened there. And I really think that as this goes on, the reporters are going to have more access to people who are sitting around them, and they'll probably flesh the story out a little bit. But theviolinist.com goes further than any of the other articles that I've seen so far. They've got some other audience members. One said it was shocking and disturbing when it happened. The crowd let out a collective gasp, and the band paused for about half a second and carried on and continued to take us on a magical musical journey. And you had a little bit of a problem with that comment.
Before we even go on, just what you just read, shocked and I'm not shocked. It's so interesting to me. God bless everyone listening to this. I'm not trying to isolate anyone or any communities. I know I have been, how did you describe me a little while ago? A statesman. So let me just start by saying I'm not trying to make any community sort of stereotypes or anything. That is item A. But item B is that this is not shocking to me. Again, with the audiences looking the way that they have looked for so long, and the specific type of programming to maintain and center this predominantly white Western perspective, of course, something like this would eventually happen. What do you want me to say? That I'm shocked? I'm not.
Because you have been a victim of it, and you're outlining all of the exact reasons why a person in that environment would be shocked. We already know that it's a predominantly white environment, and the person probably thought they were going to go and hear some nice jazzy orchestral arrangements of Charlie Brown tunes. That I would never expect somebody to utter a racial slur out loud in the middle of something like that. No, that would very much surprise me in that milieu.
We still dealing with it. We'll see what the DSO does about this. Once upon a time, I would say publish the man's name, put his face, put his face on the cover,
cash register,
right? Put his face on the cover of Symphony magazine, let everyone know. But if they are saying they're going to ban him, so let's talk about why they don't want something like this to happen again. So if they don't want something like this to happen again, other places, I would say they have a responsibility to share that information with, at the very least, other local arts institutions, and most equitably with every orchestra in the country. Again, not to embarrass, not to shame, not to perpetuate that sort of cycle of attempted humiliation, but rather to create this safe space that these orchestras allege that they want to create. That's what I think. Am I going too far?
I understand your perspective.
I'm glad that Cyrus, Chestnut, and friends were able to continue the show. I hope they're doing okay. We're going to transition into the second movement with a performance by Cyrus, Chestnut, and friends. This is their rendition of My Little Drum, as we all love to listen to this time of year. Cyrus, Chestnut, and friends perform music of A Charlie Brown Christmas. My Little Drum here to get us into the second movement. You always talk about in your younger years setting the mood for company, maybe a special friend by putting some jazz on
You bet.
and doing the vibe like that. Did you do that? Did you have a Christmas twist to that? Would you put on the Vince tracks and all of that
Not
stuff?
one time.
So what was your Christmas party vibe then, or your Christmas gathering music?
Well, early on in the night, obviously, it was just, whatever was on the mix CD of Christmas favorites. But my next door neighbor had, a lot of international Christmas recordings, so that was going on. But then I'd say after about 10 o'clock, it was just dance music. We were just dancing.
Yeah, yeah. That's how Christmas parties of the before times always were.
Right.
If for me, if there's anything that I have yet to experience since quarantine, is the fun dress up Christmas party where you put on
That's
some
right.
clothes and drink your my holiday cocktail. I like the what were we just talking about earlier, the crown, the apple crown,
Sure.
or maybe the vanilla crown, and a little ginger ale or something. Put a sprig of rosemary in there to be extra festive, and you got your holiday cocktail. So I don't know. I would like to host it. I don't know if we're going to have the time to
Right.
do that this year because, I go all out and like to do things right. So I don't know if you're
You don't
having
have the room for it.
if you're having a Christmas party, baking Christmas cookies and doing the Christmas cocktails, invite me and Dell. We'll be there.
And put on Little Drummer Boy and watch people go off.
I have a long kente cloth number that
Oh, very good.
a little jacket piece that I'm planning for whatever holiday gathering, or maybe we'll do a Kwanzaa gathering this year. I think that's what we'll do then. Just invite folks for one of those days. But anyway, we aren't to Kwanzaa yet. We're here in the second movement where Scott and I are going to share a piece of music that we've been spending some time with this week. I'll get us started in this week's second movement. So in my job with ACO, I've had the opportunity, to meet more and more living composers and really get into my new music bag that I love so much. And a composer whose music I've really grown to appreciate is Tommy Doherty. He's a composer based over in the West Coast. He studied over on the East Coast. His music was read by the American Composers Orchestra back in June. So an emerging composer of great, great promise with some incredible music out there. And a tune that he put me on to of his that I've been repeating in my earbuds is called Gross Misconduct. So this is a concerto grosso.
Good.
Get it? For people keeping score at home, Scott. What's a concerto grosso? Folks who have never heard that before. What is it?
Literally big concerto.
Mhm.
And basically typically it's like a string orchestra, right? And
Typically.
a solo is passed around to different groups, to
Yeah.
different parts of the different sections of the band.
Yeah, one of the ways that I always thought about delineating it was that it's a concerto for more than just a single instrument, maybe a section or a concerto for the whole ensemble anyway. So that's typically a type of piece that we think of, back in the old days, maybe even before Mozart. We're talking about more Baroque style music that gets into that concerto grosso bag. But this tune, Gross Misconduct, is very much contemporary. It was written by Tommy Doherty in part to fulfill the requirements of a doctorate that he was working on over there. And it has a really cool sound to it. I wanted to share a little bit of the ending here. It's not just strings. It includes some brass and some percussion. And I think the use of all these instruments to create all of those really crunchy, even beautifully dissonant sounds is really cool. Here's a little bit of it. Gross Misconduct by Tommy Doherty. So you hear that percussion in there.
Love
I
it.
feel like this piece really keeps you on the edge of your seat. It has the very juxtaposed aesthetics that are quick in and quick out. I think it's so fun. What I was thinking about as we were listening there. I know what a brake drum is because of classical music. Where it goes in a car, I don't know. No clue. I could not begin. Maybe it goes under the hood, breaks, or maybe by the wheel. I don't know. But it's an instrument that a lot of percussionists use, and that sound kind of reminded me of that. Does it sound like that could have been a brake drum?
It sure
that
does.
somebody was banging on? It may have been that. Anyway, so let's just this podcast is called Triloquy.
It is.
This music, this tune, Gross Misconduct, is very listenable and very interesting for me. It's my bag. I've always loved new music. I think sometimes, and I'll put the onus on the presenters, sometimes we baby audiences and don't give them as meaty of music to work with, to listen to engage as we think they can handle. I think it goes without saying that a piece of music like this is one that you would really have to sell to somebody in a decision-making position in one of the more traditional areas of music, whether that be radio or live performance or whatever. NPR has the extra eclectic spot once a week where I know that a piece of music like this could very easily fit and be appreciated. What are your ideas of normalizing music of this aesthetic for an audience who, may be more used to the major triads and the Mozart, style and approach to classical music? How do we normalize this sort of classical music as equally valid?
If I know the way that you feel about the idea of a specialty show, that things are relegated to a specialty show.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of putting baby in the corner.
Right. So, this is, it's like taking the criminal the criminal element away from cannabis possession. Right. So if you expand, what if Extra Eclectic no longer went by that handle, and instead every night between 10 and midnight, we
hear new music, music by living composers.
Right. So, you begin doing it that way, and pretty soon, it's creeping into the 9 o'clock hour, and then maybe it's a little bit more diffused. I think that's one step.
What do you, what do you do with people who don't necessarily know how to put music like this in their day or in, their classical music consumption? A lot of casual radio listeners, at least, let's stick to that, may just turn on the radio as background music. They just want something soothing. Some people want something to sleep to. Where would you suggest to the new music listener to put this in their day or in their listening schedule? What would be your suggestion?
About 9 o'clock.
So so it's nighttime, but maybe you're not quite getting all the way settled yet.
Yeah, you might still be doing something in the workshop or cleaning up around the house, and maybe you want something to put a little extra spring in your step. That sound to me really encourages active listening. You have to sit and give it your attention so that you can take in everything that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that you got to line it up when people are in a position to give it that attention. Maybe mid-afternoon.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know. Again, maybe I'm a unique listener. Driving in the car at rush hour, that would get me through.
In the morning?
No, and coming home.
Okay.
Yeah, but maybe so in the morning. I'm going to the old shipyard. Here's somebody playing a brake drum. I love it.
Is that going on your Christmas 2022 list?
Maybe not for Christmas. I mean, I don't know. There's a certain aesthetic I like for Christmas, but I wouldn't be opposed. Maybe, if this were on my playlist around the holiday season, I would, make some crack about Santa's workshop, and maybe this is what it sounds like. You can think about the elves really getting into some mischief, or I think there's a way to contextualize anything.
Or look, they're playing a brake drum. It's like giving your kids all these fancy gifts, and they end up playing in the boxes. We have a drum over here,
Right.
but I'd rather play this hunk of metal off of a car.
That was an episode of Rugrats, I believe. Yeah, you're onto something there. Anyway, huge shout out to Tommy Doherty. I don't know if that was a brake drum or not, but
It sounded. You're right. It sounded like
kind of
it.
sounded like it. But
Yeah.
incredible piece of music here. Here's a little bit of the ending here of gross misconduct. Really incredible tune. Nice period at the end of the sentence there.
Whip crack.
Love it. Yep. All right. What you got this week for a second movement?
So there's this band that I've been listening to lately that is called Do Nothing. And when you do a search for them, you have to do Nothing Band, because otherwise you come up with search hits like Why It's Okay to Do Nothing Sometimes for True Success, How to Succeed Doing Nothing, How to Be Successful by Doing Nothing. This is article after article.
Mm-hmm.
So Do Nothing is the band, and the track is Adventures in Success. And I love this track because it has that groove. It has sort of a feel to it that I liked. But you might remember years and years ago, Baz Luhrmann's Wear Sunscreen, where it was just this guy saying, maybe you'll get married, maybe you won't, maybe you'll be rich and maybe you won't, et cetera, which was fine. And, it had some good points in it, but I didn't believe him, and it was kind of a blase presentation. Do Nothing, Adventures in Success. I like listening to the way that he delivers the lyrics, because it's almost like he's saying, I know you're not going to do any of this, but you should do all of this. So the secrets of success. The first law of success: take inventory of your assets. Don't be modest. Don't be critical either. The second law of success: write a description of the person that you would like to be and describe your personal dress, your home, your automobile, and you will become it. The third law of success: concentrate on a mental image of the person you would like to be. And they just string, he expands on all of these laws and everything. But at the end of it all, I can kind of hear in his voice him saying, this is going to make it to like January 15th.
Okay. And all of this is in the song.
All the lyrics are there, but the ideas that I'm bringing forth, what I hear in it, no, that's subtext.
A unique creature. There has never been anyone just like you, and never will be. You have talent and abilities that no one else has. In some ways you are superior to any other living person. The power to do anything you can imagine is within you when you discover your real self, just by practicing a few simple laws of success. Take inventory of your assets. Don't be modest and don't be critical either. Be open and objective. Write down every good thing about
There's
yourself.
a little bit of those laws you were describing. How'd you come on this? How did that happen?
This was a band that was suggested to me by a friend, and I have kind of been consuming their stuff voraciously for, I don't know, like the last 5 or 6 days. Do Nothing is the band. Just a really high energy, fun, spontaneous kind of band. Good stuff.
All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Well, we're here in the third movement where this week's guests are Maria Clark and Maria Thompson Corley. They've come together to navigate the intense emotion, the scars of suffering and religious passion in hymns and gospel tunes on a new album called Soul Sanctuary. It's on Nabona Records. And I think it's just yet another really incredible example of the art that is really foundational to American music, what we should be considering early music in this part of the world, certainly classical music in this part of the world, and why it's important to continue to revive it and to put it at the center of what we're thinking about when we use that phrase classical music. So I was very honored to have both of the Marias on the show. We talk about Soul Sanctuary, we talk about the importance of the spiritual and many of the cultural implications and applications of a study and a focus on this music. So to get us into the third movement, we're going to hear one of the tracks from the Soul Sanctuary album. This is Maria Thompson Corley and Maria Clark performing their edition of Glory, Glory, Hallelujah, a beautiful spiritual to get us into this week's third movement. Hope y'all enjoy.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. When I lay my burden down. Glory, glory, hallelujah. When I lay my burden down.
Because I was actually, I felt this push and kind of pull between what I grew up with versus now I have to sing in this classical European style with all this extra vibrato, you know, and that's not what I grew up listening to. You know, I started off in piano, and my first piano teacher who I ever had was originally from Scotland. And I'm from this small town in Georgia called Eatonton, Georgia, and nobody knows where it is. And I use Alice Walker as a landmark, you know, because I say, oh, Alice Walker is from my town.
Mm,
But and you know, her story where she built the characters around the color purple came from my area.
mm,
But so we did not grow up at all having access, you know, and then a lot of my colleagues in Atlanta, I work in Atlanta now, and they'll say, like, Maria, do you let's go over here to eat to this restaurant, you know, where such and such and such and such is. And I'm like, no, I don't. And they're like, oh, I forgot you didn't grow up in Atlanta. I'm like, no, I didn't. I grew up in the country about 70 miles southeast of Atlanta. So we did not have access. Maybe if I had grown up near the city, I would have had more access to the arts and, you know, and to classical music. But
mhm,
particularly also where I was from, we did not have access to classical music. And this Scottish man ended up, you know, marrying one of the women from our town, and she decided to retire and come back home. And they had lived in New York for years, and they came back, and he was the one, you know, it took someone from Scotland and who had lived in New York for years and who was a musician to come and introduce me to opera, introduce me to piano. And he would have me listen to, you know, operas on PBS and listen to, in my piano lesson, he would play Leontine Price, Jesse Norman. He would
mm.
not just do piano, he would expose me to all of that. So that was the only exposure I got to it. And actually, coming up, trying to sing in this style, I had this voice and I could sing in the style. And this was the type of gift that I felt God gave me. I would have loved to have, sing like Patti LaBelle or Aretha Franklin, or Whitney, but I just didn't have that type gift that was given to me. It was more the classical style gift. And I was singing in the choir at schools and things like that. And trying to incorporate that, in singing in the Black church where I was from, a lot of them did not understand that style. So actually I got made fun of a lot, by my classmates and by even some adults who didn't even understand, the style and what was, because they had not been exposed to it. A lot of times you would make fun of things that you haven't been exposed to. Mm-hmm. So singing in that style, and then also trying to fuse that while keeping the integrity of the classical style of singing, and trying to fuse that with the soulfulness that I actually grew up listening to in the church, at home. At home, my parents would play Motown. They didn't play, my grandmother. Now, I will say that my grandmother did love Mahalia Jackson, and they did not know anything about classical music, but every time Pavarotti came on the television, everything stopped, and we would all sit and listen to Pavarotti, because my grandmother loved Pavarotti, even though they knew nothing about opera. Mm-hmm. So, because, he had that crossover appeal. So, but trying to fuse the two, it's been a fine line. And then sometimes I have to be kind of reeled back in, and I'm told, Maria, well, that's too much, and you're kind of outside of the style now. You gotta bring it on back. And I will say that I did get reeled in a couple of times from Dr. Corley when we were recording. And I was fine with that. She did give me a lot of freedom. I will say she gave me a lot of freedom. But I did get reeled in a couple of times, but I understood exactly the direction she was going and what she was saying. So, it is a balancing act that you're trying to play between that classical kind of structured style versus the soulfulness and that soulful style that we are so familiar with.
And so my background was completely different than hers, in that I grew up in Western Canada, in a little town where my dad was a dentist, and there were very few Black people in this place. And I was born in Jamaica, and my mom is from Bermuda, and although I've lived in the United States most of my life at this point. So when you talk about Black culture, there are Black cultures, and they're not all exactly the same. But my parents, who met in Montreal, at school in Montreal, were in a group, a West Indian choral group, and they sang some spirituals. They sang West Indian folk songs, and they sang some spirituals. And my grandmother actually was a pianist who attended the New England Conservatory, and had some idea that, I don't know where she got this from, that on Sundays you should only listen to classical music like that. Those people were more elevated than other people. I don't know. So I heard Handel's Messiah a lot growing up, and did Western musical history all through, and wanted to learn to play the piano, because from the time I was 2, I guess, my mom was teaching my brother. She had also taken some piano lessons. So, but on the other hand, I listened to popular music all along. And my dad, who came to love classical music after he met my mom, listened to reggae, we into the Bob Marley. We also had Mahalia, we had Roland Hayes, had Paul Robeson, these classical recordings, and, jazz. He loved Ella. He loved Carmen McRae and Sarah Vaughan and Joe Williams and Nat King Cole, all these people, all these luminaries. So, and as I was growing up, we had this in common, that we both listened to Prince. I was a fanatic for Prince, and listened to all kinds of popular music, and was trying to get more information about the music that was in the States, because at that time there were Canadian content laws, and we didn't get a lot of, you had to have a certain amount of Canadian content, and trying to tap into, like, what is the Black culture like in the States, because we felt really isolated. So anyway, but my whole thing with the style. And I'm not a hierarchical person really, as far as like, well, this is art and this is not art. I'm more like, if does it move me, does it touch me, how am I feeling, does this go with my feelings? So if I get into my car, and my son doesn't really listen to the classical station, so like he's listening to whatever, and if I like it, I like it. It's like, oh, and Lizzo, okay, I'm down, I'm
Mm-hmm.
with it. So I mean, for me, it's just when I decide to arrange something, there's a certain amount of, okay, well, I'm wanting the melody to be this at this point, like my choice to have this climax on this note or whatever. And then within the tradition of like being able to spin it and do some of what Marie was talking about. I mean, when I worked with Daryl Taylor, was kind of one of the first people who convinced me that I could compose things. And that was something that Daryl always did. There would be, and I know with there's a great tradition in spirituals of, there's a climactic thing and it's written this way, and then you make it a little extra to show
Mm-hmm.
what you can do. So yeah, I was with that, and perhaps had a little bit more. I know I had a lot more tradition of, okay, this is what is on the page. And yet, from the time I was small, I could improvise and I could play by ear. So when you do that, obviously yeah, it's coming out of your head. And I was so glad that Maria came up with the idea of us doing a couple of improvisations,
Mm-hmm.
because then that was, so much more the church experience. And that's something that I love to do. And then you're really, truly, truly, truly collaborating. It's not, you can't just look at the music and do what's on the page. And you have to listen to each other and follow each other. And yeah, that true spirit of really the soul of church, I
Mm-hmm.
would say. That was a wonderful thing for me too.
Dr. Corley, I want to hear more about what Ms. Clark is talking about regarding being reeled in. I mean, what was the collaborative nature of creating these recordings and, staying true to what you wanted the project to be in the
Mhm.
process? Can you speak to that?
Sure. I mean, well, first of all, the project came from Maria. It was Maria's idea, and she reached out to me about wanting to record my music. So, that was the one thing I should definitely mention. Um, but it was just like there were some times where, if there's an embellishment that I felt like maybe wait until closer to the climax to start embellishing on this particular melody, maybe let it um because it was if it's uh a piece that's quite long, then maybe we start off and then we build the embellishment more as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
um and then there's some tempos that I was like, she's got such a fabulous voice. And I mean, there were some things that I wanted to go maybe a little bit faster, and she was feeling a little bit slower. But there was one thing that she took way slower, and it just made it so much better. It was so powerful to me, that Unto the Hills, when I conceived of it, it was not because it was an arrangement that I did for my mom and her friend, and they were going to do something for someone's funeral. My mom asked me to arrange this. So I made something quite simple. The piano was simple for that reason. I mean, my mom plays, but she didn't as much as I do. So yeah, and then her friend is quite a nice soprano voice. And so it was it wasn't nearly that slow. And Maria wasn't even familiar with that song because it's a hymn. It's not a spiritual, so to speak. It's,
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who wrote it, but it was like it was meaningful for me because I had arranged it for my mom to have it on the recording. And when Maria did it, she did it so much slower, and it was just majestic. It just took it into another realm. So, didn't
Yeah.
reel that one in, and I thought it was pretty good. Yeah.
Miss Clark, I wonder if you'll speak a little bit more to the freedom that the spiritual allows. When we talk about arrangements of these spirituals in particular, we aren't talking about this, dictionary of spirituals that we all go to and this is how they're sung. So often these songs are presented through unique and oftentimes original arrangements of the songs. Do you feel like that offers you more room for musicality, maybe even more challenge, more responsibility? What are your ideas about the the relatively free nature of the spiritual?
Um, I think we have a responsibility to be free, and we should.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to still, again, there's that balance, though. You have to also keep the integrity of the tradition. And like anything, you can go too far in the opposite direction as well.
Mm-hmm.
I often, I have to admit, I often do get on to my students here at Spelman, and I have to remember and kind of, say, stop, Maria, because I have to remember they have not grown up in the generation that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like maybe our generation, Maria and I's generation, might be the generation, maybe one of the last generations where we're still kind of connected to the elders and that style of singing. And then this newest generation, what do we call it? Generation X? You know?
I forget.
I'm Generation Y, millennial, so they're even the Generation Zs and even the Generation Alphas that are coming along.
Oh, is that
okay.
Alpha? Okay.
Is it Alpha? Okay. And I have to remember that, they don't have the same experience necessarily that I had coming up, and they might be from different areas, or they might be from a more metropolitan area that I'm from. And I tell them, I said, you're just singing this way too straight. You're singing it way too proper. Part of that freedom is also in the dialect,
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of these spirituals, the arrangers are still writing in the dialect, and some of Maria's are as well. And there's freedom also in the enunciation,
Right.
and sort of connecting back to the way that our ancestors actually talked, because I told them, I said, these spirituals were born out of slavery. Do you really think that, the slave would have been pronouncing every T, like with a hard British T, or they would have been
Mm-hmm.
saying, the R's just so, those consonants, so, and then they don't understand a lot of the enunciation of the dialect. So then I try to teach them that. And then, there's some of it that is like, okay, how much can you teach versus how much of it has to just be natural and inbred, and you have to be born and grow up with it. So I don't know, to be honest with you, Garrett, it just kind of gets on my nerves. And I will say that it works my nerves to hear someone sing a spiritual that is just so proper, and every enunciation of every consonant in the words is so proper,
Mm-hmm.
and they sing everything just straight. This is not Bach. This is not, like I said, Mozart. This is not an academic exercise. This is something that you have to feel from your soul, from your spirit. And we can even bring up the spirit of, say, our other genre that we created, jazz.
Right.
Where you get that freedom to improv and to just feel the music as you go. We're following the notes. Yes, we are. We have to keep the integrity. But if I can't feel something, and if you're not touching my soul, and it has to be honest, not just that you're going to sit up here and do a whole bunch of runs to just show off that you
Right.
can do it, and to try to be a crowd pleaser. It has to come out of your heart and your spirit. And if I don't feel anything, and you just sit up here and sing it like a Puritan, I mean, that's not what a spiritual is to me.
Right.
That's just
Right.
me. Yeah.
Dr. Corley, I wonder if you'll weigh in on the issue of dialect. I've talked with a lot of people. I've collaborated with Dr. Louise Toppin, who speaks on the importance of dialect. At the end of the day, there are many people, especially folks who are not Black, who may feel, awkward using some of those dialects. At the same time, that's a part of the respect of the genre, of respect of the history of what the music is. How do you engage or advise the conversation when it comes to people's comfort levels with saying, wade in the water, and as opposed to wade in the water. How do you inspire people to dig into that dialect?
That sounded so silly. Um, okay, so to be honest, like as you can hear, I mean, I didn't grow up in Georgia, so I mean, my speech patterns when I moved to the States were seen as too proper by some people. Like when I went to school, there are people who, so but I think that again, it's like when you choose to sing a particular song, and no one's forcing anybody who's not comfortable to sing a spiritual, right? So if you're going to bring yourself into that world, it's like if you're singing in French, I mean, you have to have some idea of how to pronounce things in French. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, there are shades of, like some people, the dialect, like I remember the first when I was first moving to the South, I mean, some of those heavy, heavy Southern accents, I was like, excuse me. I mean, and it's the same if you listen, there's subtitles sometimes if you watch a film from Great Britain and someone is, from like some real Cockney area or whatever, Scottish,
Hmm.
sometimes it's like, excuse me, so there are shades. So I think, I don't think someone has to, if it feels like you're almost putting on blackface to use a particular kind of inflection that is just not your mouth does not want to do, and it's going to sound just as ridiculous. But I think that everybody, I think, if they are a musical person, they should have an ear and be able to listen and be able to, you don't have to speak the Queen's English all the time, regardless of who you are. So I think people can, you drop some final consonants. I think most people can do that, not clip things, and maybe they won't sound like, they grew up in a small town in Georgia, but I mean, they won't sound like they're trying to be, you know, Queen Elizabeth, or I guess now that she's gone, King Charles, whoever. Anyway,
Hmm.
singing a spiritual. So, that would be my thing. I would be willing to compromise a little bit on, being 100% like a field holler if that's not going to work for you. Or you can just say, I'm just really not comfortable and sing Debussy. It's great stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Dr. Corley, let me ask you, quite squarely and quite frankly,
Yeah.
can the Negro spiritual, can the Afro-American spiritual be performed equitably and justly by individuals and ensembles who are not Black?
Hmm. You know what? I know that on one hand, if I sing a song that is not my experience, or, someone is singing a song that is not their personal experience, which most songs are not the singer's personal experience, then, they're already having to wade into something. I think that, it's possible, and I think it depends sometimes on for me personally, and I know that not everybody feels this way, there's some words that sort of jar me coming out of a mouth of someone who they don't seem to fit the
Hmm.
profile, and maybe that is partially because of the attempts that have been made to erase us from the equation of having culture and being excellent, and so, I mean, I'm not absolutely hardcore in that regard. I think there's some words that, Deep River, for example, you know what it's based in, it's a code song and it's about, campground, and this heavenly thing is not maybe specifically what the words seem to say. On the other hand, I mean, it's such a gorgeous melody and could have two meanings, and if you aren't thinking about it as a code of escape, that I think, somebody else could sing it and it could sound quite beautiful and it could be quite heartfelt if you're thinking of a different emotional experience. But, I mean, I don't have a firm opinion that I am going to say because honestly, I really love to hear these spirituals sung by the people for whom they would have been a natural part of our history. Um, and but I do think that there is the possibility of feeling something very deeply and relating to it and putting it across. Um, because where I come from sometimes is that okay? is my Chopin authentic? Because I'm not Polish.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that I can experience it and feel it. Now there are no words, so the words are another thing, but I don't know. I think if someone can do what Maria is saying and really internalize the feeling and the emotion and bring, you know, a level of empathy to it, I think that, it's possible. I've seen a lot of people who would, like, you could pull up a million recordings and say, yeah, but what about that? Are you,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
because I've heard some egregious choral, especially renditions of spirituals that I'm like, oh no, no, no. You had so many other choices. No, but I don't know. I don't know that I fully answered your question because I don't have a fully formed opinion that is this, every single case is this. I
Mm-hmm.
think, it's sort of a case by case basis and.
I mean, it is a very nuanced conversation and idea. Miss Clark, I would love to get your idea on that, but I'll add the sort of other side of that discussion to it, in the same way that, some of us Black people may feel a way about hearing people who are not Black using a certain affect. I imagine there are lots of Black people who sort of feel a way when they hear that operatic technique coming from your body, coming from your instrument. How do you engage that dissonance for people, folks who can't quite make the connection between our history, our ancestry as it relates to the spiritual, matched with the Western European operatic technique?
Okay. That question kind of puts me in the mind of a recent performance that I did, and it was for the Pink Frog organization here, and it's a breast cancer awareness organization, and they did a fundraiser, and it was at Morehouse, and my collaborative pianist Trey Clegg and I performed Maria's "I Want Jesus to Walk with Me,"
Mm-hmm.
and I guess I was a little concerned because Karen Sheard, who is one of the main Clark sisters, was headlining.
Mm.
They also had FAMU's marching band come up to play and dance.
Oh, so
And
this was a Black event.
oh yes, it was a Black event. So, and then they had jazz and they had a jazz pianist. And then I'm thinking, okay, I'm getting ready to sing in the operatic style. I'm singing a spiritual, but in the operatic style nonetheless. And then I just thought, well, I'm going to make sure I put a little hot sauce in it,
Mhm.
I'm going
Yeah.
to put my seasonings in it, and I've seen some Facebook postings where they say, Black people put seasoning into the ancestors tell us to stop,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But, I did feel that I did my best anyway to try to put the soulfulness into it, even though I'm singing in this kind of vertical, tons of vibrato, head voice operatic style. I'm not belting, this gospel and grinding and all of this kind of thing for gospel style. But I'm singing in my classical style, but I'm going to also put my soul and spirit into it. And it came across very well. I mean, they were clapping during the singing of it.
Mhm.
Every time I would hit a high note, or Maria was talking about the climaxes. Every time I would reach a climactic area in the spiritual, they would start clapping while I was singing. I got a standing ovation when I finished. So I think, a lot of times we might kind of also stereotype based on some of our own experiences.
Sure.
I, again, share it with you that I had experiences where I was actually made fun of in my hometown for
Right.
playing and singing classical music. And I mean, literally, I did one piano competition when I was a kid, and they were throwing paper up on the stage at me. And my mom was there. She was upset. I went off the stage crying. And, I have those little flashbacks. We don't ever forget, no matter how old you get, you don't ever forget those experiences. But I also realize that I'm singing also, these are I'm in the metropolitan area. I'm in Atlanta. I'm at Morehouse where, they have more exposure, even though they it's a Black event and it's a Black crowd, they do also have the exposure to the arts
Hmm.
in general, more so than the area where I'm from. And the area where I'm from, I think, is getting better. Like they're coming to appreciate the arts more, and they're getting more exposure to the arts. And then there's social media and the internet. And recently I did perform again at my hometown, and I received a very warm reception from them. Again, singing Maria spirituals. So
Hmm.
I think Maria spirituals helped me out a
That's
lot.
what it was. You treated me when you were a kid. But I mean, I think the level of commitment that you put into these songs, I mean, I think it's just undeniable. And I think that I don't know if and as children, maybe we can have that level of commitment, but a lot of times it takes some seasoning in our lives for us to really and I mean, just the not being intimidated by the fact that you're doing something that's really, really different is
Mhm.
also a little hard when you're a little kid. But I believe that people do respond to excellence, even if it's not something that they would choose first of all. If they were, going to go out and buy something first of all, I mean, they hear something and or they see something, and it's like, wow, that's amazing.
Hmm.
That's amazing. And I know, having heard you sing that song, via live, but also on video. I mean, I know that you really, really put everything into that song, and all of the songs. So I wasn't surprised at the end of the story was that they gave you a standing ovation. Honestly, I knew that that was going to translate. And I just wish people would be more open. I gave a talk once. I was asked to at this community center in sort of the so-called inner city, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
in Lancaster. And so it was called, I called it classical music for urban kids or something like that. I can't remember. But, because I came in and this kid says, "How are you going to rap?" And I'm like, "Well, no, I'm not really. You would want to hear me rap." So I played different classical pieces, and I said, we all speak different languages, but we all have the same emotions.
Hmm.
So if I say I love you in French, if I say I love you in whatever, whatever, it still means I love you. So, and I chose things that I thought were, kind of more rhythmic, some of them, but I also played Schumann's Traumerei, and I explained what it was about. And I thought, okay, it was warm. There was no air conditioning. I'm thinking they literally are going to take this and fall asleep. But they were still awake and they listened. It wasn't super, I didn't go for 2 hours or something like that. And then afterwards, a couple kids came up and said very quietly, like they didn't want anybody to know, "I really like the Moonlight Sonata," or something like that. Now, again, I'm not hierarchical. I don't think that they're better or worse for having this, but I think, what I was saying is, don't put yourself in a box. The people you're going to school with now are probably you. I hate to say this, but you're probably not going to know most of them when you're an adult. There are going
Right.
to be a few that will stick with you. And for you to put yourself into a box and limit yourself because you think somebody else is thinking something, and this person is you're probably not even going to know them in 10 years. I mean, you don't have to like everything. But for me, if, it touches my emotions, and other music touches my emotions, and I just, that's my thing. It's like, these assumptions, like it's got to be this or else there's something wrong. It's not black enough. It's not whatever
Hmm.
enough. If it's not, I mean, you know, and are white people doing that? Like those white boys who listen to rap, they're not thinking, well, this isn't white enough. I'm not saying there
Hmm.
aren't some people who are, just so very racist that they're like, no, this is not white. But I mean, most white people are just living their lives,
Yeah.
they just do their thing. And we're like, well, that's not really black. I'm like, we can flow into all kinds of areas and like enrich them. The Williams sisters, were they black enough when they started playing tennis? I mean, so anyway, off my
And
soapbox.
yeah, no, I appreciate it. I would be remiss, Dr. Corley, if I didn't point us toward that phrase classical music or that word classical. We use it so often, and my general sermon is that, that phrase is treated differently in India as it is in China,
Yeah.
as it is in other parts of
Yes.
the world. So,
Yes.
I believe that we have to shift our thinking around that phrase to really acknowledge what our classical music is, starting with those field hollers and the spirituals, and of course, the traditions codified by indigenous communities as well.
Mhm.
With all of that said, Dr. Corley, I wonder if you can make a case for the spiritual as American classical music, not something that should exist outside of that concept of classical music, but something that belongs inside of it.
Well, sure. I mean, I mentioned like these beautifully constructed melodies that are, have created a rich just foundation for so many compositions, and not just by Black people. I mean, people hearing this music, and it was just undeniable. But I've tried to start using the word European classical music,
Mm,
and I didn't do that in this conversation because there are so many classical musics,
right.
and that it has become. There's a very interesting video about is Europe. They say it's classical music white supremacy, and what the person really means is European classical music, and the idea that this is the pinnacle of all music, and everything else is not quite as good, not quite as worthy, not quite as important, and that the only way that it is elevated is by incorporating it with a European classical tradition. And it was really a brilliant point. And so as far as that goes, I suppose again with my hierarchical thing, I mean, obviously we all want to feel respected and appreciated. And so when you start saying words like classical music, it has this cachet of like, okay, well, this is something that's you know um, more. I don't want to use the word important, but like what I mean. It's like it's up
Hmm.
here because it's classical music. This other stuff is just, anybody can do that, or it's not as skillful. Whereas I say, okay, I'd like to see you try to produce a song that is a hit around the world. Like,
Right.
production is orchestration, really, you know. So, but I mean, that's my thing. It's like I don't really so much care if people want to call it classical or not classical, because once you start getting into that world of, well, is somebody calling it this, is somebody calling it that, then your mindset is, I'm trying to impress somebody, I'm trying to legitimize myself by being included in this little club by a bunch of people who for whatever reason chose to exclude me, and just goes to exclude me because of who I am. So it's like, if I can get into that country club, then I'll feel that I have moved myself forward. And then you're hanging out with all these people who maybe you don't want to hang out with. Now, classical music isn't like that.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think if you want to look upon it as, on a par with any other music that goes back, for many years and was created and shows genius, then absolutely. If that's what classical music means to you, then yes, I make that case. But I'm not really concerned about the semantics of it. I think it speaks for itself. Its beauty speaks for itself, no matter what people want to call it or not call it, or who wants to maybe denigrate it and say something to cast aspersions on it. I'm not listening to them because I think
Hmm.
they're wrong. And
And I certainly think that applies to the album Soul Sanctuary. No matter what you want to call it, it's beautiful music, it's genius music, and I'm so appreciative to the both of you that it exists now in our lexicon of recordings.
well, thanks,
Mi-
Maria Clark.
well,
It was her idea.
Miss Clark, I'll ask you the final question, and it sort of shines back on a point you were making earlier about the younger generation's lack of proximity to the elders and that sort of culture. So as we continue to move forward in history, further and further into the 21st century, what do you see as the role of the spiritual? We aren't speaking in code anymore, or maybe we are. What is the significance moving forward of this seminal, foundational American genre of music, in your opinion?
I think it still will continue to be relevant, extremely relevant, and I think it still has a even brighter future to come, because as Maria or Dr. Corley has stated, that it is universal and we still feel the same feelings today that we felt yesterday and in yesteryear. I also feel like, honestly, and it's tragic that it takes a tragedy in order, for us to think about being inclusionary. But with the killing of George Floyd, the amping up of the Black Lives Matter movement, and all the police killings of Black Americans, there has been a wave of Black Lives Does Matter in the classical musical realm. And, more of them, even with NATS, National Association of Teachers of Singing organization, they have created, from the Black Lives Matter movement and from all this inclusionary talk and action, they have created, with their general auditions, student auditions that they do every single year, they have a Negro spiritual competition that they do. And they alternate it yearly with the Hall Johnson competition. So the Hall Johnson spiritual competition is one that the students can enter. And then the next year they'll do the Negro or African American Negro spiritual competition that will be encompassing of different composers. But, one is just Hall Johnson. They had never thought of doing anything like that before. We had Black Lives Matter in classical music. And, there have been, even I teach full-time at Spelman, and then I also teach voice part-time at Emory University, which is we know a PWI. And since also the Black Lives Matter movement, they've invited Dr. Louise Toppin down to do she did a workshop and masterclass on African American composers. Dr. Corley was actually included. One of her songs was included on it. And she's done a workshop she did divided it also with workshops on spirituals. And here are all these white students. There is not one Black vocal student that I saw, and that I've taught anyway. I think there have been a couple in the last 2 years, but the vocal students there are largely Caucasian, Indian, and Asian. You might have a couple of Hispanics come through here and there, but Black, not so much, other than in the jazz department there. And Dr. Toppin was teaching these kids, the correct style and how to feel the African American spiritual. And, I don't think they ever had that before, and also thanks to Brad, Dr. Bradley Howard, who, is thinking of these things too there. And I think that has happened not only here at some of the schools here, is happening all across the country and maybe all across the world.
Well, that would change the answer to my question about is it authentic, or is it, can these things be performed with integrity? Because with the right education, and the education is happening, then, anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's okay. And that's a good point as well. Whether they can feel it authentically, it depends. And I'm not quite sure, maybe if they've grown up a lot around Black culture, but, even for them to want to learn about it, even for them to be willing to take a chance in performing it in front of people. And, I did have a couple of students who I wanted them to sing a song by an African-American composer. And they said, well, I just don't feel that I would do it justice, and it's not my experience. So I feel like it's appropriation, or I feel like, and they just did not want to disrespect the culture in their eyes. But I think because in this field, we're opening it up to being more inclusionary. Atlanta Opera is trying to do more collaborating with Spelman, Morehouse, Clark, Atlanta. And you have opera companies all over the country that are trying to have these HBCU initiative programs. And I think the spiritual will continue to be relevant, and I think it will continue to be a soul soother to a lot of people. You know, it helps a lot of people get through things and get through hard times in their lives. And I think we will always call upon the spiritual to be a tool for that in our lives.
Pianist Maria Thompson Corley there with soprano Maria Clark in their incredible rendition of I Want Jesus to Walk With Me. Of course, Scott, that spiritual we were talking about last week when you brought in the Montgomery Variations by Margaret Bonds. That is the spiritual that much of that tune is based on. There were actually a couple of people who really appreciated having that piece of music on their radar. I thought we had talked about it on Triloquy before.
The
Maybe
Montgomery
not.
Variations?
Yeah,
Oh.
maybe not, but they appreciated it. Caesar ordered the score. He ready to conduct the thing now.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, so you know, when we talk about the spiritual and all of its iterations and the way that it's been used in and out of classical music structures, you know, I'll ask you what I asked Maria Clark. I believe it was Maria Clark at the end of the interview who, you know, spoke to why the spiritual just conceptually is important and why it should be continued to be studied and listened to and performed, celebrated. How do you answer that question from your position in the arts? Why the Negro spiritual? Why is this something that we should continue to share and platform?
Personally, I think that they are a crucial teaching tool. And I think that by remembering the music, we're remembering the reason why the music was made and sung. And we can maintain that connection to our history in a healthy way. Especially now as we get further and further away from slavery in the diaspora. And even, you know, we can say about the same thing about the Holocaust. The further we get away from it and the memories start to fade, and then that allows those same things to start happening again.
Even though
You
it
know,
wasn't all that long ago, like
Right,
you know.
correct. What I'm saying is that, you know, if it's not kept at least close to our minds, then it can happen again. And I think that taking the spiritual and learning about the reason for it behind it is a very healthy way to do it. Plus, we have to keep saying the names of, you know, like Paul Robeson and Henry Thacker Belay and keeping those names near the front of our mind.
I mean, just think about the reality that there were not indentured servants, not sharecroppers. There were straight up slaves during World War II in the United States. You know, the last slave was not emancipated until 1942. So, you know, this is something that, you know, we have to continue to keep front of our minds, and, you know, something that the music of that time has helped us, you know, remember, and, you know, turn again, you know, the lotus that has come from that mud. You know, we have this beautiful music. So a huge thanks once again to Dr. Maria Thompson Corley and to Maria Clark. Such an incredible album. I'll have links in the description for y'all to check that out. But for now, we're going to jump into the final movement. We're running a little long this week, but we're going to get into this final Triloquy movement with a little K-pop. I've had, you know, one of my work trips to New York last week. Dell came with me. Shout out to Jonathan, guest and guest host on the Triloquy podcast. Shout out to Jonathan. Took us to a K-pop musical, and I thoroughly enjoyed myself. Here's an arrangement of some classical K-pop to get us into the final movement. I'll talk a little bit more about this musical on the other side. So this K-pop musical, the setting of it is the tech rehearsal before a giant K-pop performance. Now, before I even get too far, there may be folks who are unfamiliar with K-pop. The only reason I knew what that was because of the artist Psy, and I guess over 10 years ago now, the tune Gangnam Style.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe people remember the tune Gentleman, and sort of preparing for this, just returning to Psy to see what was going on. He has a new hit out. It's called That on YouTube. I think now it has nearly 400 million views.
Whoa.
It's something how something can be so huge and just off of my radar, off of other people's radar. Anyway, that is how I learned about K-pop, Korean pop music. So when I was invited to this musical, I'm like, okay, here we go, K-pop. I'm going to go in with an open mind. So, of course, it kicks off with one of those big boy group K-pop performances, a la BTS and all of that sort of thing.
Right.
And as I'm watching, I'm like, okay, we have K-pop stars here. I'm going to be appreciative. Oh, wait, these aren't K-pop stars. These are actors who are not lip syncing. They are actually performing because they're trained in musical theater. So, right off the bat, I had to reframe sort of my thinking around this performance as not celebrating K-pop artists, but celebrating actors, celebrating people who are trained in the theatrical arts. So from there, I'm really enjoying it. And the folks in the cast start to get emotional because, as people who keep up with Broadway know, this show was abruptly cut. It was abruptly canceled. So I'm sure people had plans. Maybe people were coming from out of town, perhaps even from out of the country to see them perform in a Broadway show. But now it's been canceled. So the emotions were very much there. And at the end of the show, one of the lead actors made the point that Broadway audiences have to support BIPOC shows. So he gave a special shout out to the current Black show on Broadway. I think it's called Ain't No Mo. Just saying that audiences, y'all got to do your part. They're out here canceling BIPOC led shows, and we need your support. Broadway is something that I can see as being this ivory tower thing as we talk about, that concept in classical music. But from my perspective, it was one of the more progressive things. I'm thinking about Rent. I'm thinking about The Lion King and all of these huge shows that get all of this attention. But diversity in these sorts of arts must also be an issue. As someone who has a history in acting, did you see Broadway as one of those immovable ivory towers that centers a canon and centers an audience through that canon?
Only from the vantage point that I had, never actually walking up and down Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
but the assumption with Broadway comes Les Mis, Phantom. What else? What are Rent?
Cats,
You mentioned
maybe.
Rent and Cats. Sure, right.
All these shows that I'm not going to see.
But there's loads of other shows that are happening that we never hear about because it's either off Broadway or off Broadway.
Yeah.
And your question again was,
Do you see Broadway as one of these ivory tower institutions that need to come to pay the piper when it comes to diversity and programming? An Asian led Broadway show about something that is so ubiquitously Asian, in this case Korean. But I think it's appropriate to say that the culture of K-pop at this point has spanned the world. I'm talking about it. I know what it is. So I guess for me, I just never put myself in those positions. I can say there needs to be more Black shows on Broadway. I guess I never saw the issue of there being an absence of Asian-led shows on Broadway as well. And again, to hear the point made from the stage, we need y'all to support BIPOC-led shows on Broadway for these things to survive, for people to continue to stage these things. I just had never considered it and thought about it. I had never thought about Broadway as having that problem.
do you think that Broadway shows are doing better than orchestras right now as far as that diversity?
My assumption would be yes, but the audience looked pretty similar to a classical music concert, if I'm gonna be honest. I mean, there were some people of color. We're also talking about New York City, one of the most diverse cities in the entire world. So it should certainly be more diverse than it tends to be, I guess I would
Mm.
say.
Yeah, no, I never held Broadway up as that, the golden or the ivory tower or whatever. I was always more interested in what was happening at the smaller venue down around the corner,
Yeah.
with the shoestring budget.
And I'm there, when it comes to many things, supporting the small mom and pop restaurant and to, local businesses and that sort of thing. I saw people on stage at this K-pop musical realizing their dream. So
Hmm.
again, in shifting my perspective on this from looking at K-pop stars on stage to looking at actors who have learned how to pretend to be K-pop stars, it just really um inspired some appreciation for me that I hadn't had before.
And no reason for the abrupt cancellation that you know of?
I mean, not that I know of, but the argument is that, at least what was being argued from, the member of the cast at the end of the show was that support of BIPOC led things is hard to come by. And
Hmm.
when people feel like tickets aren't selling this way or that way, they'll just pull the plug on
Hmm.
something. And it's our responsibility to support those
Yeah,
things.
keep in mind that it's not just the livelihood, but the cast becomes your family,
Right.
and you work with each other every day for months on end, and then however long your production goes, uh, it's like a death in the family
Yeah.
when a show goes down.
Yeah. I think for me, at the end of the day, I'm bringing this up in the triloquy because I have done a lot of work this year, especially in these past few months, to do my best to put myself in other people's shoes. There's some healing that has to happen to be able to do that, to decenter, your own trauma and what you're, dealing with in a valid way, not to diminish those feelings, but through my attempts to put myself in other people's shoes, I've been able to begin to understand, how I can quell anti-Semitism as we've been seeing it pop up, how that has had to have an impact on the artists, maybe I should say the artist that I tend to celebrate and do everything I can to justify publicly. But there are certain changes that I've had to make. Watching this K-pop show just reminded me and helped me think about what it must be like to have aspirations of that sort of space as an Asian person who's typically typecast in a certain type of role. Even on the classical music side of things, I think about Aida. I think about, we watched Nutcracker the other weekend and was just kind of looking at that Chinese dance a little bit funny.
Mm.
I can, I can never understand what it's like to be in those shoes, but with my own marginalized experience and just using my imagination and just realizing that you don't see a lot, if any, Asian led shows on Broadway or in that genre of performance is something that we have to pay attention to, can't ignore. So shout out to all of the cast. I hope that we can all do what we can to build that solidarity by supporting different things. If there's something a little different at the holiday program, just calm down. It's going to be okay. If somebody is in the audience yelling racial slurs at at the performers, I only laugh again because it's so ridiculous. Do something. Damn. Don't just sit there. Don't sit there and be shocked and go run to a reporter to talk about how shocked you were. Do something about that person in that moment. Don't expect people to not have emotional reaction to their marginalization. Let's just have that empathy. Try to put ourselves in other people's shoes so that all of these things that we're preaching and alleging to support, we can actually realize and manifest. I hope that K-pop musical comes back somewhere somehow because it was beautiful, it was entertaining. The 14-year-old girl in me was being enlivened when you feel like the K-pop dancer is looking right at you and he winks. It's it's definitely a thing, and
I'm sure.
I just I really see the value in diversity of programming in that way. So maybe a soft triloquy for this week.
Oh,
Let's
that's nice.
let's build that solidarity. Go listen to some K-pop. Go listen to some Jewish music in celebration of Hanukkah this week, and let's let the arts, let's let culture be the impetus for the actual connections that we can make toward building that solidarity and creating a better, peaceful, world that doesn't require, all of this nonsense we talk about on this podcast.
Hallelujah.
Goodness gracious. Well, thank y'all, and we'll see you next week.